The Doctor, Amy and Rory arrive in what appears to be a tacky 1980s hotel, where they meet a group of individuals who've been taken from their everyday lives to find themselves stuck here. The hotel is host to a seemingly infinite number of rooms, each containing bespoke nightmares, waiting for their intended guests to find them. With a Minotaur roaming the corridors that seems to feed on their fear, the Doctor takes it upon himself to save everyone, and helps them find a way to deal with those fears, encouraging them to lean on their faith. Something which proves to be a terrible mistake. The God Complex is a really interesting piece of Doctor Who. What could have easily been a run-of-the-mill script with characters literally running through corridors for 45 minutes instead becomes a fascinating exploration of the Doctor's character, mulling on themes of fear, faith, trust and responsibility. There's so much going on under the surface of this episode, and I think it's one of the strongest offerings from the entire 11th Doctor era. So I thought I'd check myself in, find my room, and have a crack at breaking it all down. This story takes inspiration from a variety of cultural and literary sources, the most obvious of which is arguably Stanley Kubrick's classic horror film The Shining. With its 80s style hotel setting and its both supernatural and psychological horror elements, the film is a clear inspiration on the episode. The hotel guest's changing psychology mirrors that of Jack Torrance and his family, and a lot of Nick Hurren's direction and camera work seems to be influenced by Kubrick, particularly in their use of mirrors and reflections. Hurren uses the camera to distort reality and create a sense of unease and disorientation in the viewer. Note how often things are presented in a subjective way rather than what is actually happening, such as the jump cut editing in the possession sequences, or how we switch between the adult and child versions of Amy in this scene, temporarily seeing through the Doctor's eyes. These directorial choices highlight the fact that this story is not one that relies on any hard logic, and is much more interested in telling a story that focuses on character and thematic resonance. Another interesting point of comparison for the episode is George Orwell's seminal novel 1984. The stories share the concept of rooms where characters' worst fears are introduced, with the sole intention of breaking them. In Orwell's novel, the dystopian autocracy seeks to use this as a form of punishment, to strip people of their individuality, not only making them more compliant, but instilling in them an absolute love and adulation for their totalitarian leader Big Brother, just as the hotel strips individuals of their faith, instead converting them to praise the Minotaur, declaring their love for him and welcoming their death. And then, of course, we have the allusions to Greek mythology through the inclusion of the Minotaur, the creature lurking the corridors of the hotel, picking off the guests one by one. Theseus and the Minotaur remains to be one of the most recognisable Greek myths in the canon, with many of its elements seeping their way into popular culture and art. It tells the story of a half-human, half-bull creature trapped inside a labyrinth, with human sacrifices regularly sent in to feed it. One day, young Athenian hero Theseus finds his way to the centre of the labyrinth and manages to slay the beast, saving any would-be sacrifices from their fate. The Minotaur as a creature is believed to represent the inner conflict between our rational mind and our repressed animalistic instincts, and so is often a symbol of human fear. The most common characterisation of the creature is that of the archetypal monster, a beast to be slain by the hero, but others have interpreted the Minotaur as a sympathetic figure, a misunderstood creature emphasising its innocence and alienation, merely longing to be free of its prison. So, is the God Complex's Minotaur also a sympathetic figure? Obviously it plays the role of the story's antagonist, hunting and killing innocent people, but is that its fault? The Doctor suggests that after so many years trapped here, the creature is now just a shadow of what it used to be, merely acting on instinct because there's nothing else of it left. We learn that before being trapped inside the complex, it was a member of a race that would travel the universe, finding planets where they could set themselves up as gods to be worshipped. There is an obvious question here as to whether this is morally defendable, or if this race were taking advantage of their followers. Regardless, at some point some of these worshippers clocked onto the Minotaur scheme and sought revenge, imprisoning it on this ship. And so the Minotaur becomes a victim itself, trapped and alone in an eternal hell. Its victims are only sacrificed in order to keep it alive and to prolong its existence and punishment. Ironically, every time the Minotaur finds a new worshipper, it ends up killing them in the process. And it's here that we see the parallels with the Doctor. There are shown to be several similarities between the creature and the Doctor, from the visual symbolism to hints such as the fact that both reside in a spaceship that defies logic and spatial dimensions that has taken on the form of an outdated bit of British culture. We're also shown that every time somebody dies within the complex, an object falls to the floor. With Lucy, it's her notebook, Joe his cufflinks, Howie his glasses, Rita the phone that she was holding. And as the Minotaur is dying, we see the do not disturb sign that the Doctor places on the door of his room fall to the floor, as though the Doctor's the one that's dying. The parallels drawn between the two characters are explicitly referenced in the Minotaur's final line.
An ancient creature drenched in the blood of the innocent, drifting in space through an endless shifting maze. For such a creature, death would be a gift, then accepted. I wasn't talking about myself.
Of course, the main point of comparison for these two characters is the episode's namesake, their god complexes. The Minotaur sets himself up as a god to be worshipped and adored, living off their faith and belief in him, mirroring the Doctor's use of his companions. Examining the Doctor-companion relationship is a theme that runs through a lot of Toby Whithouse's scripts for the series. With School Reunion, he showed the impact, both positive and negative, that the Doctor continues to have on Sarah Jane's life long after her travels with him, and how Rose's realisation that she is not the first to travel in the TARDIS affects her. Similarly, The Vampires of Venice has Rory call out the Doctor's recklessness, and how he cultivates an environment in which his companions feel compelled to impress him, which usually means putting themselves in danger. The God Complex sees the most explicit examination of this relationship, with Whithouse posing the question of why the Doctor has companions in the first place. The Doctor has often been portrayed as a godlike figure. Back in the late 80s, in the Sylvester McCoy era, script editor Andrew Cartmel was planting the seeds of the Doctor being far more than just another Time Lord. And the revival series didn't shy away from presenting the character through deific or messianic imagery, or sometimes just explicitly in the dialogue.
Playing with so many people's lives, you might as well be a god.
The lonely god.
You must have been like God.
And there he is, the voice of God.
Although not a god in the literal sense, the 10th and 11th Doctors in particular seem to enjoy playing the part of this legendary hero and being the one man that can save the day, which is exactly what this episode explores. The Doctor has a massive god complex, and in fact this episode explicitly names this compulsion that the Doctor has through the character of Rita. Despite only having been in the Doctor's company for a short time, she accurately observes this behavioural pattern in him, questioning why he believes that it is down to him to save them all. The Doctor explains that he feels obligated to try and save everyone, especially Amy and Rory, because he's the one that brought them here. Similar to how the 12th Doctor will go on to express his duty of care toward Clara, the Doctor here feels responsible for his friends and their safety. However, this is where we arrive at a contradiction, because when it all comes down to it, he is ostensibly the one that is putting them at risk in the first place. He admits as much himself, saying he knew they would take the opportunity to travel with him, and yet he still offers it to them, knowing full well the potential danger that his adventures entail. We can infer that he's able to deal with this ever-present risk because he believes that he will always be able to protect them, despite the countless examples of him failing to do so for so many others that have travelled with him. Interestingly, even when being called out on this toxic trait, he still can't help himself but to invite Rita to travel with him too. It's telling that immediately after this conversation is the first time Rita praises the Minotaur, as if maybe the Doctor's manipulation here has started to work on her. She trusts in him and believes that he really can save them, so she does what he says and falls back on her faith, leading her straight to the Minotaur. And it's important to note that death at the Minotaur's hands is especially tragic, because this isn't just the end of life. Before this happens, you are mercilessly stripped of everything that made you who you are. All your individuality, beliefs and philosophies are rendered completely meaningless and are replaced by your faith in the creature. When supporting characters in Doctor Who die, it is generally either the fault of the villain or the character themselves. Sometimes these are presented as noble sacrifices, with the characters becoming martyrs and giving their lives to help fight the villains. And whilst the Doctor often expresses guilt over this, having been unable to save them, he's not actually responsible for their deaths. But here, he is. His mistake is what kills Rita and Howie, and what almost kills Amy. He tells them to lean on their faith, unintentionally speeding up the process of their ripening for the Minotaur to take them. And what's worse is their deaths serve no purpose. They literally die for nothing, and that is ultimately the Doctor's fault. Despite all of the god allegories, the Doctor has also frequently been shown to be a fallible hero. He's flawed and makes mistakes, and sometimes he's not always on the right side of the fight. And this is something that he knows himself. He holds a lot of doubt for himself and his actions, which sometimes culminates in an identity crisis, such as the Time Lord Victorious, or the 12th Doctor's Good Man arc in Series 8. But I think more importantly, this character has a lot of self-hatred, something which literally manifests itself in Amy's choice, in the form of the Dream Lord, an amalgamation of all those darker elements of his character and the deep contempt that he has for himself. A lot of this self-loathing would seem to stem from his role in the Time War, and the burden of guilt that he carries. Interestingly, it would seem that the emotional ramifications of causing the genocide of his people also acts as something of a catalyst for the narcissism and inflated sense of ego that can come out from time to time, as we see in this story. For instance, it doesn't even occur to him that Rory may have lost faith in him after the events of the previous story, nor that Amy's greatest fear could be related to him, with him first assuming that the Weeping Angels are intended for her. The concept of the character of the Doctor, the man himself, being separate to the Doctor, the role, or a set of ideals, is one that crops up a lot in the Stephen Moffat era.
Because sometimes, on a good day, if I try very hard, I'm not some old Time Lord who ran away. I'm the Doctor.
We're introduced to the recurring motif of the Doctor's name being one that he chose, and the symbolic importance of it. When taking that name, it is a promise that he made, never cruel or cowardly, though he doesn't always keep that promise, and has been known to be both. The Day of the Doctor addresses this inclination he has to play the hero.
We've got enough warriors. Any old idiot can be a hero.
Then what do I do?
What you've always done. Be a doctor.
Paul Driscoll suggests that the Doctor as a name is not the alternative to the warrior or the hero, but their unification. A doctor fights disease, and a doctor heals the sick. He is the warrior and the hero in one. In the God complex, he fails to be a doctor because he tries to be a hero, and as a result, people die. The Doctor believes that not only can he save the victims of the complex, but also the Minotaur itself, and the fish. A very small and seemingly insignificant detail in the episode is the inclusion of a goldfish bowl. When the Minotaur escapes the Doctor's mirror trap in the spa, called the Pasiphae Spa, named after the mother of the Minotaur in the original myth, the Doctor instructs Amy to grab a fishbowl that is on the floor. This highlights the extent of his God complex, believing he really can save every living thing here, even extending to the goldfish. Ironically, it is this action of trying to save the fish that actually leads to their deaths, as with the humans. Amy safely relocates the fishbowl to the reception out of harm's way, only for Gibbis to later find and eat them. Yet again, the Doctor's well-intentioned actions have backfired and had the opposite effect, with their fate sealed in one throwaway line. And worse yet, he has implicated Amy in this. Whilst the Doctor is a character that values all forms of life, it is interesting that he prioritises these fish over a human being, and his friend no less, Rory, who has been knocked unconscious. Even more interesting is that Amy also prioritises the fish over her husband at the Doctor's instruction, obediently doing what she is told, following him blindly. It's as though she's fulfilling her role as companion without question, perhaps out of a subconscious fear of what happens when he no longer needs her. Speaking of, one of the primary themes of the God complex is that of fear. The complex uses its victims' greatest fear to generate a desired response within them, cooking them so they are ready for the Minotaur to feed on. The contents of the room seem to vary in the types of fears that they present. There are the more conventional phobias, the clowns, the ventriloquist dummies, the weeping angels. There are social and cultural fears, like the girls that bully Howie and the strict PE teacher that screams in the Doctor's face. and those relating to specific personal relationships, i.e. Rita's disappointed father and, of course, Amy being abandoned by the Doctor. Of the characters shown to have a room in the complex, the only one whose fear we don't see is the Doctor's. The Time of the Doctor reveals that his room contains the crack in time, a slightly out of place retcon used to tie the episode into the overall arc for the 11th Doctor. This feels especially shoehorned in given his reaction to seeing the room is who else, implying a person rather than an object or concept. Many have suggested alternative contents, and the one that I personally subscribe to, although probably the most obvious, is that the Doctor's greatest fear is himself. As said, the character's self-hatred has long been established, and it feels only natural that this would feed into his fears. Surely the Doctor's greatest fear is destroying his companions, the people closest to him. He would be presented with all the blood that soaks his hands, the guilt he carries with him, the idea of him becoming the monster and seeing himself alone. There's a great quote from internet essayist Annamarabella in her analysis of this episode. And no matter how often his companions' stories have ended in death, despair or destitution, he could never stop picking them up, because the loneliness would kill him. Despite the many lives he has saved, there is so much blood on his hands. We love the Doctor, but we have to see how easy it is to hate him. Amy's greatest fear is revealed to be the Doctor's abandonment of her, symbolised through her younger self sat waiting for his return. Although fear and faith are often considered opposites and are somewhat presented as such in this story, the truth is much more complex, given that faith is a construct and composite of several feelings: hope, trust, humility, and fear is a singular, simple emotion. The fears and faiths of the other victims are almost never directly linked, with the exception of perhaps Howie, with his fear of mockery and being viewed as this nerdy loser kind of linked to his obsession with conspiracy theories. But with Amy, her fear is in direct correlation with, yet also in opposition to, her faith in the Doctor. Her fear is literally that her faith is misplaced, which, as it turns out, is the case. Which brings us to the other big theme of the episode. Faith, faith, faith! Through the supporting characters we are shown several different types of faith. Rita is a practicing Muslim, she has religious faith. Howie has faith in his conspiracy theories. Joe the gambler has faith in the notions of luck and chance. However, Amy's faith is revealed to be in the Doctor.
The Doctor's been part of my life for so long now, and he's never let me down. Even when I thought he had when I was a kid and he left me, he came back. He saved me. And now he's going to save you.
Amy idolises the Doctor. He essentially imprinted on her as a child and had a profound effect on her life growing up right through to adulthood. So it makes absolute sense that her greatest fear would be the Doctor's abandonment of her, something she spent almost her entire life grappling with, to the extent of having to seek psychiatric help. As Driscoll says, subconsciously Amy is afraid that her faith in the Doctor has been misplaced, that one day he won't come back for her, ever. But that nagging fear is deliberately suppressed by her faith. And because she has lived with the idea of the Doctor for so long, she struggles to separate the actual man from the imaginary friend that she lived with for all those years. She still sees him as this fantastical figure, an impossible hero, something which is at odds with the reality of this flawed individual she now has in her life. Amy has an idea and an expectation of the Doctor in her head that he can never truly live up to. But this is not something that she's ever had to consciously acknowledge up until this point. With this said, Amy's faith in the Doctor is not as absolute as it might seem. Despite what she says, she has experienced several instances of him letting her down. Most recently at this point, The Girl Who Waited shows an older Amy becoming completely disillusioned with the Doctor, and over time her adoration has turned to hatred. Just a few episodes earlier than that, he failed to save her baby, letting his own hubris blind his judgment. And upon seeing Rory die in front of her in the dream world of Amy's choice, she brutally condemns his inability to bring him back.
Save him. You save everyone, you always do. It's what you do.
Not always. I'm sorry.
Then what is the point of you?
The episode itself even points to the cracks in Amy's faith in this scene.
Every time the doctor gets pally with someone, I have this overwhelming urge to notify their next of kin. Last time I said something like that, you hit me with your shoe.
Where before she apparently hit Rory with her shoe for questioning or doubting the doctor, here she smiles, as if acknowledging the truth in what he's saying, and agreeing to an extent. There are cracks that have begun to show, but not enough to make her properly question them. Or perhaps more likely, she is avoiding thinking about them, as it is much easier and much more comforting to ignore them. To save her, the Doctor has to break Amy's faith in him. This is reminiscent of a scene between the 7th Doctor and Ace in The Curse of Fenric. A key point of difference, however, is that in that story, this is a strategic move from the Doctor, later explaining to Ace that it was purely out of necessity, and then going on to rebuild that relationship and restore her faith in him. Here though, the Doctor really means what he's saying to Amy. He has to stop playing at being the hero and give up on the idea that he can save her, because it is he that she needs saving from. The scene sees him prompting her to face her fear, encouraging her to recognise that both her fear and her faith is something that she no longer needs to hold on to let go of her imaginary friend and the hold that he has over her life. The natural conclusion for the Doctor after the events of this episode are that he needs to say his goodbyes to Amy and Rory. He gives them a home and a car, a gesture signifying that he recognises they have a life outside of him, an attempt at suppressing his selfish inclinations, and at treating them with respect, as opposed to extensions of himself that he has commodified to serve his vanity and ego. From here on out, the Doctor and Amy's relationship is much more equal. He is her friend, not her hero or saviour. This newly established equality is visible in the simple act of Amy kissing the Doctor on the forehead, a role reversal of something that he often did to her. This episode notably marks a shift in the series in regards to how companions travel with the Doctor for the rest of the Moffat era. None of the Doctor's companions until the Fam in Series 11 are full-time Tardis residents. They have their own lives outside of the Doctor, and they join him for adventures in between, in contrast to the escapism fantasy that RTD companions and Amy at the beginning of her time in the TARDIS seem to be chasing, running away from their ordinary lives. From this point forward, travelling with the Doctor isn't an escape from life, it is merely part of it. This is a big step for the Doctor, but he still doesn't quite manage to completely let go. Small symbols like the couple's new house having a door painted TARDIS blue would seem to signify this, and obviously he later returns and continues to travel with the Ponds in Series 7, even as they begin to more obviously pull away from him until their quote-unquote deaths in The Angels Take Manhattan. The episode's focus on faith poses an interesting question that is only briefly dwelled on in the story itself. What is the Doctor's faith? It would stand to reason that if he has a room in the complex containing his fear, then he must also have some sort of faith. So what is it? The Series 2 episode The Satan Pit considers the possibility of the Doctor having some kind of faith.
I believe I haven't seen everything, I don't know. It's funny, isn't it? The things you make out the rules. If that thing had said it came from beyond the universe, I'd believe it, but before the universe, possible. Doesn't fit my rule. Still, that's why I keep travelling, to be proved wrong.
This tells us that the Doctor believes his faith is in science, in logic and rationality. Even when faced with an entity claiming to be actual Satan, the Doctor refuses to believe this, staying true to his rules. In one of the final scenes of the God Complex, Amy asks the Doctor about his faith, but he doesn't gratify her with an answer.
So you must believe in some god or someone, or they'd have shown you the door too. So what do Time Lords pray to?
Could it be that the Doctor's faith is in himself? His confidence or arrogance that he can constantly play the hero and save everyone would suggest that, like Amy, he has faith in his own abilities. Driscoll suggests that perhaps it is not Amy's faith in the Doctor that drew them to the ship, as he hypothesises, but instead his faith in himself. Perhaps the scene of him breaking Amy's faith in him is actually more about his own acceptance of the fact that Amy doesn't need him. In this moment, he recognises that her world doesn't revolve around him. She is her own woman with her own life, and he is selfishly suffocating her chance at that life.
I took you with me because I was vain, because I wanted to be adored.
He recognises the danger of his behaviour. He recognises that he is not a hero, he is not a god.
I'm not a hero. I really am just a madman in a box.
As a result, his faith in himself, his god complex, crumbles. And this is when the Minotaur is starved and dies, again supporting that thematic link and parallels between the two characters. Analogically, the death of the Minotaur is the death of the Doctor's ego in this story, a mortal creature playing at being God, but ultimately failing when both they and their worshippers see them for what they really are. Hello, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've left links to all of my sources in the description, but I just want to give a particularly big shout out to Paul Driscoll, whose Black Archive book on this episode was a massive inspiration. I really recommend you check out that whole series of books if you've got an interest in these kind of analytical deep dives. There's some really great stuff by some great writers. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a like, share, subscribe, all of that business. I imagine my next upload will be sometime in the new year, in which case I hope everyone has a lovely Christmas and New Year's and however you celebrate, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Cheers.